I was 36 years old the night my husband leaned in close at his own partnership party and told me to go home. Not whispered. Close enough that his mother heard it from her chair. Close enough that the woman 2 seats down, Kiera, 28, business development, wearing a dress the color of a wet leaf, heard it too. Grant said I was hovering, said everyone could feel me watching him. He said it twice, and the second time his voice went flat, the way it does when he's finished with a conversation. Just go home, Margot. He didn't know I'd already found the hotel charge in Merrickville. He didn't know about the second account he'd opened 14 months ago at a bank we'd never used. He didn't know I'd read the message where he told her he'd deal with the Margot situation after the party. And he had no idea that every single vendor in that room, the venue, the caterer, the bar, the florist, the photographer, the trio playing in the corner, was running on pre-authorized debit through an account with only my name on it. I said, "Okay." I picked up my clutch and walked out to the terrace. Grant went back to his guests, looking like a man who had just solved something. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if these stories stay with you the way they stay with me, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's is even harder to sit through. The spreadsheet had 9 tabs. I'd color-coded every one of them. Green meant confirmed and paid. Yellow meant confirmed and pending. Red meant it still needed me. That Saturday morning, there was almost nothing left in red, and I remember feeling something close to satisfaction about that. Sitting at our kitchen table in my housecoat with a second cup of coffee going cold at my elbow. November light in Ottawa comes in low and thin. It came through the window over the sink in long gray strips and lay across the table and across the stack of contracts I'd printed and clipped in order of due date. I don't trust anything I can't see on paper. That's not a personality quirk. That's 11 years as a financial analyst for a hospital network, reconciling ledgers that have to balance to the cent because somebody's insulin depends on it. The caterer needed a final head count by 4. The bar service needed the signed rider back. The florist had already emailed twice about the height of the centerpiece pieces because I'd asked her to keep them under 8 inches so people could see each other across the table. Grant had never asked me about centerpiece height in his life. He would have said it didn't matter, and he would have been wrong, because at a table of 10 strangers the difference between 8 inches and 14 is whether anyone talks. From down the hall I heard his electric razor start again. "Babe, did you take my navy blazer to the cleaners?" "Garment bag," I called back. "Left side behind your winter coats." A pause. Got it. I went back to the sheet. Venue confirmed. Caterer confirmed. Photographer confirmed. I clicked over to the guest tab and scrolled the list. 90 names sorted alphabetically, with a column I'd built for dietary restrictions. Winifred Vance, my mother-in-law, was flagged in yellow. No shellfish. Low sodium. Confirmed with Kitchenock 30. Grant came out of the bedroom doing up his cuffs. He looked good. He'd been looking good for about a year, in a way I had noticed, and then, with the discipline I apply to everything, filed under midlife and closed the folder on. "Still at that thing?" he said, nodding at my laptop. "Almost done. You don't have to do all of it, you know." I said something like "I know," and he kissed the top of my head, and I remember his cologne, which was new, and which he'd told me in September was the same one he'd always worn. Here is the part I've thought about more than any other part. He wasn't cruel to me that morning. He was pleasant. He was a pleasant man in a good mood walking through a kitchen that ran because I ran it, and it never once occurred to him to wonder how. He'd been at Thibault and Kerrigan for 9 years, senior associate. The partnership vote was set for the following Thursday, and everyone said it was a formality. And Grant had started saying when I'm partner instead of if. The party was my idea. I'd suggested it in August, and he'd said, "Sure, if you want to," like he was doing me a favor, and then he'd spent 3 months telling people about it. I paid the deposits from my own account because it was cleaner. That's the whole reason. Nothing dramatic. Grant's money moved in and out of our joint checkwing in a way I could never predict, and mine didn't, so I set up the pre-authorized debits against a checkwing account I've had since I was 19. 9 vendors, 1 account, my name 2 weeks before the party. I was doing what I do on the first Sunday of the month, which is reconcile our joint account against my ledger. I keep a running sheet going back to 2016. Grant thought this was a joke about me. He used to tell people at dinner parties, "She's got a spreadsheet for the spreadsheets," and everyone would laugh, and I'd laugh too. The paycheck deposits were wrong, not wrong enough to notice unless you were looking. His pay landed twice a month, and for about 7 months the deposits had been coming in smaller. 200 here, 300 and change there. Nothing that would trip an alarm. I wrote the dates on a legal pad, the way I'd write down a variance at work, and I felt nothing yet. I want to be honest about that. I felt curiosity, and something underneath the curiosity that hadn't come up for air. Then I opened a browser tab and logged into the old account he'd had since before we met. The one he always said had about $8 in it. I knew the password. I'd known it for 11 years. He'd never changed it, and I'd never once thought of that as a fact about our marriage until I typed it in. It had $5,180 in it. I sat there for a while. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere on the street, a snowblower started up for the first time that season. A month early, some man who couldn't wait. There was a second account listed under his profile in the sidebar. Opened 14 months ago. I clicked it. The transfers came every second Thursday, just before his pay hit our joint. Small. Regular. He'd been skimming off the top of his own paycheck like a man taking a little off the counter before he put the till in the safe. I scrolled the purchases. A jewelry store in the Byward Market I'd never heard of, $340 last November. A different one in March, $610. Something from a lingerie retailer in February, $185, and I knew the brand, and I have never once in my life owned anything from it. 3 nights at a lodge up near Lake Clear over the Labor Day long weekend, $920. The weekend I drove to Almonte to close up my grandmother's house for the season, and he said he had a site inspection in Kingston. And a hotel charge. The Bayview in Merrickville, February 14th. $268. I wrote everything down. My handwriting stayed the same. I've looked at that legal pad since, and you could not tell from the letters that anything was happening to me. The tablet was in the kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. An old one we'd bought when we moved in, back when we shared one streaming password and thought that meant something. I hadn't touched it in over a year. The battery was dead. I plugged it in and made a fresh pot of coffee and waited. When it woke up, everything was still there. The cloud sync had never stopped running. His messages, his notes, his photos, everything feeding into a device in a drawer under a pizza flyer for 11 months, because he had never once thought about it. Kiera LaChance's thread was near the top. The name didn't mean anything to me at first. I opened it and scrolled all the way up to the beginning, and then I read forward, and I did not rush. 8 months of it. The first ones were nothing. Great work today. You free Thursday? Then it changed, the way a fire changes when it finds something dry. I read every message. I made myself. She called him a name in her texts that I won't repeat, not because it was filthy, but because it was small, and I remember thinking that a woman who calls a 42-year-old man that is not thinking about the rest of his life. The one that stopped me was 8 days old. When are we actually going to sort this out? I'm tired of waiting. And him. After the party. I'll deal with the Margot situation after the party. Just be patient. The Margot situation. I read it twice. Then I looked at the 9 tabs on my laptop, and the yellow flag beside his mother's name, and the seating chart where I'd put his boss's difficult wife next to the one person at the firm who could handle her, and I thought about 3 months of work I had done for a man who had turned me into an item on a list. I set the tablet down. I turned to a clean page and wrote the date at the top. Then I listed every vendor for the party, and beside each one, the account the payment authorization ran through. All 9 ran through me. I already knew that. I'd set it up that way because I set everything up that way, because that is who I am, and for the first time in 3 months I was glad. The Aubrey room at the Rideau Grand looked exactly the way I had spent 3 months making sure it would look. Edison bulbs on wire above the long tables, throwing everything amber, white linen, centerpieces at 8 inches, a banner in gold script that I had personally approved, Grant Vance, partner. The bar ran along the north wall, 2 bartenders in black, moving fast and clean. The trio was tucked in the corner near the windows, playing something low, because people were still eating, and you don't push a room before it's ready. 90 people. Grant knew all of them. I had invited most of them. I stood near the edge of the room with a glass of soda water and watched my husband work. He is good at it. He has always been good at it. He moved from group to group with that wide, easy smile, a hand on a shoulder, a laugh pitched exactly loud enough to make people at the next table want in on it. He was wearing the navy blazer I'd taken to the cleaners on Tuesday. He looked good in it. He knew he looked good in it. Kiera came in at 7:20. She was younger than I'd pictured, even knowing the number. 28 has a specific way of walking into a room, unhurried, like the evening owes it something. She introduced herself to the people by the door as a colleague of Grant's, which was true the way a struck match is technically just a small piece of wood. Grant spotted her from across the room. I watched his face change for about a second and a half. Then the smile came back, easy as breathing, and he crossed to greet her the way he greeted everybody. Handshake, laugh, one hand briefly at her elbow. Casual. Practiced. She was seated at table 6. I had not seated anyone at table 6. By 8:30, the toasts were done, and the room had gone loose and warm. People were up. A few of the younger ones from the firm were doing something at the bar. Winifred, my mother-in-law, 68 years old, in the plum-wrap dress she'd bought when we went to the mall together in September, was at a high top near the window talking to a woman from her church. I was standing by the cake table, which I'd had put near the entrance so nobody could miss it, because someone had to be watching for the moment when the photographer needed to be in position and the kitchen needed the 2-minute warning, and nobody else in that room was thinking about it. Grant appeared beside me. "Can I talk to you a sec?" His voice had the texture it gets after 2 glasses of anything, generous and slightly slowed. Sure. He moved me half a step toward the wall, which he probably thought was private. It wasn't. The bar was 3 feet away, and 2 men from his team were standing at it. His mother's high top was maybe 2 meters to my left. "You've been standing in one spot all night," he said. "You've barely talked to anybody." "I'm watching the vendors." "That's what I do. You're hovering." He said it low. Not low enough. "Everybody can feel you watching. You're making people uncomfortable." I looked at him. His eyes flicked out across the room. Toward table 6. I don't think he knew I clocked it. "Just go home, Margot. Take the car. You're obviously not having a good time. I'm fine, Margot." The warmth drained out of his voice, the way water leaves a tub, all at once and with a sound. "Just leave. Let me have my night." The 2 men at the bar had gone quiet. I could feel it without turning. 2 meters to my left, a chair shifted. His mother's chair. I held my clutch in both hands. I looked at my husband's face, at the impatience sitting in it, at the way he was already looking past me toward the rest of the room. He was done with me before I'd answered. "Okay," I said. I walked to the terrace door with my back straight. I did not look at table 6. The terrace was small. String lights, 2 iron benches, a cedar planter that hadn't been my idea. The door swung shut, and the room behind me dropped to a muffled thud, and the November air came up off the canal and went straight through my dress. I opened my clutch. I took out my phone. I called the venue coordinator first, then the catering manager, then the bar service, then the photographer, then the florist, then the trio's booking agent, then the cake shop that was holding a second tier in the kitchen for later. Each call took under 2 minutes. I gave my name, the event name, the authorization reference I had set up when I signed each contract. My voice was the one I use at work when a supplier has invoiced us twice for the same shipment. Pleasant, unhurried, nothing to fight with. I was back inside in 19 minutes. I stood in the doorway of the Aubrey room. At the bar, both bartenders had stopped pouring and one was already capping bottles. A woman in catering black lifted a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres off a high top and set it on a rolling cart. Another came out of the service door and started stacking chafing dishes. The trio finished the phrase they were on and did not start another. The cellist was packing. Grant was standing in the middle of the room with a glass in his hand and his mouth open on the end of a sentence. He turned toward the corner, then toward the bar, then toward the catering staff, moving through Fortnite in quiet, efficient formation, like water finding a drain. His face went very still. The terrace door banged open behind me 30 seconds later, and he came through it fast, glass still in his hand, jaw locked, and found me across 5 meters of cold concrete. "What did you do?" "What you asked. That's not." He stopped, looked back through the glass, lowered his voice, though there was nowhere left to lower it to. Behind him, 2 guests were already at the coat check, not looking at anybody. "I meant step outside. Get some air. I didn't mean the dark corner, the capped bottles, the carts. You said leave." I said. "You said it twice. Don't do that. Don't play word games with me right now." Something cracked at the edge of it. He seemed to notice the glass in his hand and set it down on the iron bench harder than he needed to. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. You did this on purpose. I did exactly what you asked me to do. You're unbelievable." He laughed, and there was nothing in it. "This is insane. Do you understand that this is insane behavior? You have no idea how this looks for you." I held my clutch with both hands, and I looked at him and I didn't say anything. A couple came out through the terrace exit, the woman's heels going tock-tock on the pavers, both of them staring straight ahead like the 2 of us were weather. "I have to go deal with this," Grant said. He pointed at me the way he does when he wants a sentence to feel like a warning. "We are going to talk about this, okay?" He went back inside. Winifred found me 2 minutes later. She came out through the side door without a sound, plum dress catching the string lights, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair where she always parks them and then forgets. She didn't look angry. She looked like a woman who had just put her hand on a burner she'd been told for 30 years was cold. "Walk with me a minute," she said. We went toward the parking garage without discussing it. Guests were coming out in 2s and 3s, voices low, car keys already in hand. Somewhere behind us I could hear Grant, louder than he needed to be, talking to the hotel's event manager. We stopped near the ramp. Winifred crossed her arms over her chest. Not defensive, more like she was holding something in her ribs. "He's my son," she said. "I want you to know I know that." I waited. "That? In there." She stopped. Looked out at the street, at the wet asphalt shining under the lights. "The way he said it to you?" "His face when he said it." She shook her head, slow. "I've seen that before, not from him." She stopped again. "It was very familiar to me. That's all I'm going to say tonight." I nodded. She uncrossed her arms and looked at me straight on. "Are you all right to drive?" "Yes, all right." She reached out and touched the back of my hand. Not a squeeze, just a touch. 2 seconds. Then she turned and went back inside to deal with her son. I drove home along the canal with the radio off. Freezing rain was starting. That first fine grit of it against the windshield, and the wipers went on their own because he'd set the car to automatic and never told me. The house was exactly as I'd left it. The kitchen light was on, because I always leave the kitchen light on. My laptop was closed on the island. A mug I hadn't finished sat upside down on the drying rack. I set my clutch on the table. I took off my heels by the back door. My feet hurt. I'd been standing on polished stone for 4 hours and hadn't noticed until right then. I sat down and opened my laptop and logged into my bank. The savings account with only my name on it had $14,300 in it. Money I'd put away out of my own pay, $400 at a time, for 2 years. Grant knew it existed. He had never once asked what was in it. I opened a new account at a different institution, my name only, and I moved all of it. The transfer would settle in 1 business day. I confirmed it, logged out, closed the laptop. Then I stood at the sink and drank a glass of water and listened to the freezing rain and to nothing else. No car in the driveway, no headlights sweeping the window over the sink. Grant was still at the Rideau Grand, managing what was left of his night. He came downstairs at 7:15 the next morning. Pressed shirt, dark trousers, the good shoes. He went to the fridge, opened it, stared into it, closed it without taking anything out. I'd been up since 5:30. I had my coffee. I had my hands around the mug. He poured himself a cup from the pot I'd made, and he leaned against the counter. He didn't sit. I had to cover $240 out of pocket, he said. The room fee. The manager was going to bill me for the full remaining hours. I didn't answer. You put me in a position last night. In front of people I've known for 15 years, my colleagues, my mother. He shook his head at the window. That's not something I'm going to forget. Okay, that's all you have to say? You told me to leave, Grant. I told you to get some air. His voice sharpened. You decided to make a scene instead of behaving like an adult. I looked at him over the rim of the mug. He was watching the gray light on the snow in the yard, and it showed everything in his jaw. You embarrassed yourself, he said. I hope you understand that. That's what everyone in that room saw. He rinsed his cup and set it upside down on the drying rack directly on top of mine. I'll be late. Don't wait up. The back door closed a little harder than it needed to. I want to say something about that morning because at the time I thought it was just cruelty, and it wasn't. It was a rehearsal. Over the next 4 days, Grant would give me 3 different versions of that sentence. Sunday it was, I told you to get some air. Tuesday it became, I asked you if you wanted to head home early because you looked exhausted. By Thursday it was, I never said anything of the kind, and if you remember it that way, Margot, that says something. 3 versions. Same sentence. And every version made me a little more insane and him a little more reasonable. When his car had gone down the street and been swallowed by the ordinary noise of a Sunday, I opened my laptop again. I started with the tax refunds. April, 7 months earlier. Mine came to $2,900. His came to $3,340. He'd offered to take both and put the lump sum straight onto the mortgage principal. Get ahead of the amortization, he said, and he'd said it with a kind of pride, and I'd said sure, and I had never thought about it again. I pulled up the mortgage portal and scrolled the payment history. April, May, June, regular monthly payments. Nothing extra, nothing marked as a principal prepayment, nothing. I went into the joint checking and filtered April. Both refunds landed, mine on the 11th, his on the 14th. 9 days later, on the 23rd, $6,240 moved out in a single transfer. I recognized the destination account number. I'd written it on my legal pad 2 weeks earlier. Then I opened the renovation fund. That one had been my idea. 22 months earlier, I'd set up a joint high-interest savings account and started moving $400 into it on the first of every month, with the goal of redoing the kitchen and the downstairs bath within 4 years. Patient. Boring. Exactly the way I do most things. I pulled the full statement history. Every deposit was mine, every single one, regular as a heartbeat. The withdrawals were not mine. 9 withdrawals over 15 months. The smallest was $300. The largest was $1,250. Together they came to $6,180. Myself go slowly. I cross-referenced each withdrawal date against the transactions I'd already pulled from the second account. It took me 22 minutes. Every single withdrawal from the renovation fund landed in the second account within 72 hours. 9 for 9. Then I checked the home equity line, because by that point I had stopped being surprised and started being thorough. 2 draws. $4,000 in June, $3,500 in September. $7,500 borrowed against not our house. Or legally our house, but the house my grandmother left me in Almonte, which we sold in 2019 to make the down payment on this one. Every wall in this place has her in it somewhere. The jewelry was bought in November and March. The lodge was Labor Day. The lingerie was February, 10 days before the hotel in Merrickville on Valentine's Day. I had been sitting across a table from him in November. I had watched him open the renovation account statement when it came in the mail and set it aside without reading it, and I had thought that was because he trusted me with it. I closed the mortgage portal. I closed the bank. I closed every tab until the screen was empty. The full number sat in my head, not as pain exactly, as a figure, as the shape of what he had actually done. Yvette Chartrand's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Metcalf that smelled like carpet shampoo and old coffee. 6:30 on a Tuesday, the kind of quiet where every sound in the hall feels deliberate. She had the door propped open and a yellow legal pad already square on the desk in front of her. She looked at my face once and skipped the small talk. "Sit down. Show me what you've got." I opened my bag and laid it out in order. Bank statements, screenshots of the message thread, transfer records, the renovation account, withdrawal history, annotated in the margin with the matching dates from the second account. HELOC draws, mortgage payment history. I'd sorted it into 3 groups and clipped each with a binder clip from my work bag. She put her glasses on and read without speaking. Down the hall, a cleaning cart went past and kept going. After a long while, she set the last page down and looked at me over her frames. "Okay," she said. "Here's where you stand." She put her hand flat on the mortgage records. "The house is jointly titled, and it's your matrimonial home. That's a specific category. If you'd owned it outright coming into the marriage, you'd normally get to deduct that value. But you don't get that deduction on the matrimonial home. It goes into the pot at full value. I want you to hear that from me before you hear it somewhere else, because it's the part that makes people feel stupid. And you are not stupid." I nodded once. I didn't trust the rest of it. She moved her hand to the renovation sheet. "This account. You funded every dollar of it. That doesn't matter for ownership. It's family property either way. But these withdrawals went into an account he opened alone, and that account bought jewelry, a lodge, and lingerie for a relationship outside the marriage." She tapped the page. "That's depletion. Section 5, subsection 6 of the Family Law Act. A court can order an unequal division where one spouse has recklessly depleted net family property. The HELOC draws go in the same bucket. So does the $6,240 in refunds that never touched the mortgage." She sat back. "How long ago did he open the second account?" 14 months. "And the withdrawals from the renovation fund? When did those start?" 15 months ago. She made a note. "So the pattern predates the account. That's useful. It suggests planning, not a lapse." She looked up. Margot, this documentation is better organized than half of what I get from professional paralegals. That's my job. She almost smiled. I know. Then she said, Can I tell you something not strictly legal? Yes. You told me he's given you 3 different accounts of what he said to you at that party, and that he told you that you embarrassed yourself, and that if you remember it the way you remember it, that says something about you. Yes, there's a word for that. It isn't sensitive. It isn't dramatic. She took her glasses off. I want you to stop looking for the version of that night where you were unreasonable. You will not find it. He is asking you to help him look, and you have been helping him because you are a helpful person. I sat in my car in the parkade for 11 minutes before I could turn the key. Winifred lives 20 minutes west, in the house Grant grew up in, a brick 2-story with a porch light that has been on every night of my adult life. It smells like cedar and something baked no matter what hour you arrive. She opened the door before I knocked. Cardigan, slippers, glasses in her hair. She looked like she'd been waiting rather than just awake. We sat in the front room. She brought tea I hadn't asked for and set it between us, then folded her hands. Saturday, she said, and stopped. When Grant told you to go home. She looked at the middle of the room instead of at me. Errol said something almost exactly like that to me at his brother's retirement dinner. 1994. Told me I was making the table awkward just by sitting at it, that I should go home and let him enjoy himself. Her voice was very even. She had told this to herself often enough that most of the shake was out of it. 3 years later he was gone, woman 14 years younger. By the time it happened, I wasn't even surprised, and I've never been able to decide if that's the saddest part. The room was quiet. The furnace ticked. I didn't say anything on Saturday because I didn't know yet what I knew. She looked at me. I had to sit with it. And now? She held my eyes. Now I know what I'm looking at. She got up slowly and went to the little desk in the corner and opened the bottom drawer and took out a manila folder, the kind that goes soft at the corners after enough years. She brought it back and set it beside the tea. 3 years ago, Grant asked me to help him with some paperwork, said he was setting up a consulting arrangement, something about writing off his professional development. I signed something as a director. I didn't understand it, and I didn't ask enough questions, and I've thought about that more times than I'd like to admit. She pressed her fingertips flat on the folder. I keep copies of everything, I always have. She looked up. I don't know if it means anything. May I? She pushed it across. The top page was an Ontario Articles of Incorporation, GV Site Advisory Inc., registered 3 years ago. Grant Vance, sole shareholder and director. A registered office address I didn't recognize. A second director's signature at the bottom, in Winifred's careful looping hand. I turned the pages slowly. I read every one. Before I left, she went to the bookshelf and came back with a photograph in a drugstore frame. A backyard, a barbecue, 1994 written on the white border in ballpoint. Errol in the middle of a laugh, one arm out toward the camera. And at the far right edge of the frame, cropped almost out of it, a young woman in a sundress, looking at him. Winifred put the photo face down on the coffee table. I've had that on the shelf for 31 years, she said. I only saw her about 4 years ago. I got home at 9:40. The folder went on the kitchen table. Grant was out. The house was silent, and I didn't notice the silence anymore. GV Site Advisory Inc., clean name, professional. The sort of name that sits on an invoice without saying anything at all. The registered office was a mailbox service in Nepean. The stated business activity was construction, advisory, and site coordination services, vague in the way that only deliberate things are vague. I pulled Grant's expense claims from the filing cabinet in the basement, where I keep everything in labeled folders because he never once did. 7 quarters of them. He submitted through the firm's reimbursement portal, and I had helped him log into that portal at least 4 times when he'd forgotten the password. I knew the format. I knew what the numbers were supposed to look like. I started with the quarter Winifred said she'd signed. I found the first one 20 minutes in. Sub-consultant, site coordination, GV advisory, $780. Submitted, approved. I highlighted it in yellow and kept going. There were 10 more across 7 quarters, some small, 200, 400, one just under 2,000. One submitted the same month as the lodge at Lake Clear. The invoices were attached to each claim as clean PDFs, letterhead and all, with line items describing work that could have meant anything, and a payment remittance line to a numbered account. 11 claims, approximately $11,400. He had incorporated a company for work that did not exist, invoiced his own employer, approved his own expenses, and moved the money into the account he used for her. Because, here's the thing, the affair was between him and me. The renovation fund was between him and me. The refunds, the HELOC, all of it. That was money out of my hands and into hers, and it was ugly, and it was mine to hold. This was different. This was Roland Thibault, who had hired Grant 9 years ago and who had come to our wedding and who told me once, at a Christmas party, with real warmth, that he'd never met anyone who could read a set of drawings faster than my husband. This was a firm of 41 people. This was a partnership vote in 9 days. I made one note in my spreadsheet, 11 claims. Approx $11,400. 7 quarters. Then I closed the folder, squared the expense reports, and clipped the whole thing together. Grant came home at 10:40. He came into the kitchen without looking directly at me, filled a glass of water, and stood at the counter like a man running lines. "I've been thinking," he said. I waited. "I think we should do dinner at my mom's. The 3 of us. Keep it civil." He turned the glass slowly. "We're both adults. I'd like to handle this like adults. Talk through next steps before anything gets formal. Before anything gets formal. People say things like that because they sound reasonable. What he meant was before you talk to a lawyer. Before you know what you're owed. Before you get out in front of me." "Okay," I said. He looked up. He'd braced for something else. Tears, at a minimum. A question. "Yeah? Yes. Set it up with your mother and let me know the day." He nodded once, visibly recalculating, and took his water upstairs. The coffee shop was on Bank Street, and I got there 40 minutes early because I wanted the corner table with a clear view of the door. I ordered a black coffee. I set my bag down and did not open it. Kiera came in at 9 exactly. She was smaller in person than in the photo on the firm's website. Pretty in the uncomplicated way of someone who hasn't yet had to work at it. She scanned the room, and when she found me, something moved across her face. Recognition, then something clear to dread. She came over anyway. I'll give her that. "Margot," she said. "Hi, sit down." She sat. She kept her coat on. She folded her hands on the table and held them there like a student, waiting to hear how bad it was. "I'm not here to fight with you," I said, plainly, not gently, exactly, just to get it out of the way so we could talk. She nodded. She looked like she was deciding whether to believe it. "I want you to know one thing," I said. "Not because I want anything from you, because I think you should know it. I didn't reach for my bag. I decided the night before that I wouldn't need the paper for this. 11 months ago, Grant sent you a message. The one where he said he had to figure out the Margot situation after the party. Do you remember it?" Her jaw softened. "He told me he was going to talk to you, that he'd end it properly. He said he had to figure out the situation," I said. "Not end it. Figure it out, like a scheduling conflict." I put both hands around my cup. He'd been moving money for 4 months by the time he sent that. He set up a company 3 years ago. He drew $7,500 against our house in June and September. I let that sit. He wasn't leaving me for you, Kiera. He was building somewhere to land. He needed a soft place to be after he'd already arranged everything in his own favor. That's not the same as choosing you. I said it the way I'd explain a variance. Calm, because the facts were already more than enough, and anything I added would have been for me, not for her. She looked at the table. A muscle in her jaw worked once. I didn't know about the money, she said quietly. I know. She looked up. Her eyes were bright, not tears exactly. That particular shine of a person recalculating everything at once. She left 12 minutes after she arrived. She never ordered anything. I finished my coffee. Then I went out into the cold and let the door swing shut behind me. She ended it with him that same afternoon. I didn't know that at the time. I found out later, the way you find out things after they've stopped mattering. What I did know was that by that evening he had called me twice and left no message. I set my phone face down on the counter and made dinner. Winifred's house smelled like pot roast and the cream-colored candle she keeps on the sideboard. I got there 7 minutes early because I wanted to see the table before Grant could arrange it. She met me at the door with a dish towel in her hands and pulled me into a hug that said more than either of us needed to put into sentences. She took my coat. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just nodded once, the way women nod when they already understand, and walked me in. Grant was already at the table, phone face down beside his water glass, jacket still on, like he hadn't fully committed to being there. He looked up when I came in, and his face moved through a couple of things. Surprise, maybe, that I was early, or that I looked steady, before it settled into the version of himself he uses at work. Measured. Reasonable. Faintly put upon, as though he were doing all of us a favor by showing up. Hey! Hi! I sat across from him. I put my bag on the chair beside me. Winifred brought bread from the kitchen and set it in the middle of the table without comment. Then she sat at the head, between us, and folded her hands. Grant cleared his throat. So, I thought we could go through the basics. Figure out how we want to handle the next few months. Keep things. I brought a few things to go over, I said. I said it pleasantly. Just a fact, offered the way you open a meeting. I unzipped my bag and set a small stack of folders on the table. Grant looked at the folders, then at me. Something shifted behind his eyes, but his voice stayed smooth. Margot, this is supposed to be a conversation. It is a conversation. I just want to make sure we're working from the same information. I opened the first folder. The Bayview Lodge, Merrickville. February 14th. $268. I slid the statement across, the charge sitting in a clean rectangle of yellow highlighter. That's from our joint account. That was the weekend you told me you were doing a condition assessment in Kingston. He said nothing. I opened the second folder. The account you opened 14 months ago. Transfers out of your pay before it hit our joint. Jewelry in November and March. 3 nights at Lake Clear over the Labor Day weekend. I let a beat go by. None of it was for me. Margot. I also found the refunds. I slid another page across. $6,240. I believed it went onto the mortgage principal. It went here. I tapped the account number. Grant leaned back in his chair. You don't know what you're looking at. I've been reading documents like this for 11 years. Winifred was very still at the head of the table. I opened the third folder. The renovation account. The one I set up almost 2 years ago for the kitchen and the downstairs bath. I laid the withdrawal history flat. 9 withdrawals over 15 months. $6,180. Every one of them landed in that second account within 72 hours, and 2 draws on the home equity line. $7,500. His jaw tightened. That's a stretch. I've matched 7 of the 9 to dates in the message thread. What message thread? The one between you and Kiera Lachance, I said. On the old tablet, it was still syncing. Her name landed in that room differently than any number had. It was one thing to look at paper. It was another to hear it said out loud at his mother's dinner table over pot roast beside a cream-colored candle. Grant turned his head toward the window. "Last folder," I said. I opened it slowly. GV Site Advisory Inc. Incorporated, 3 years ago. Mailbox address in Nepean. Sole director and shareholder, you. Second director's signature, your mother, who did not understand what she was signing. I laid the expense comparison on top of the incorporation documents. 11 reimbursement claims submitted to DeBow and Kerrigan over 7 quarters. Approximately $11,400. Every routed to the account you opened for her. Every payment routed to the account you opened for her. The room held its breath. His hand moved toward the papers. Those were legitimate sub-consultant. There were no services rendered, I said. I compared every invoice date against your calendar. I have your calendar. You gave me access to it 4 years ago, so I could book your dentist. You pulled a bunch of numbers and made a story out of them. This isn't, Grant. It was Winifred. She said his name the way mothers say a name when they are not asking for anything, when they are simply requiring silence. He stopped. She looked at her son for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and completely clear. Your father told me to leave a room full of people once. He said I was making it uncomfortable. He said he only wanted to enjoy his evening. She smoothed a crease in the tablecloth with one finger. I was 49. I'd given him 22 years. I sat in the car in a parking lot in Canada for an hour, and I did not understand what was happening to me. She looked up. I am not going to sit at this table and watch you do it to this woman, and I am not going to be quiet about what I know. Not this time. Grant stared at his mother. He opened his mouth once. He closed it. I gathered the folders. I squared them and put them back in my bag, because that is what I do. I wanted you to have the whole picture before Yvette files, I said. It'll be a full financial disclosure. Everything on this table goes into the record. I zipped the bag. That's all I needed to say. He pushed back from the table. The chair barked against the hardwood, loud in that quiet house. He picked up his phone and his jacket, and he did not look at either of us on his way to the front door. It opened. It closed. His car started in the driveway. Then it was gone. Winifred let out a long breath. She reached over, took a roll from the basket, and put it on her plate like a woman setting down something she'd been carrying up a hill for 31 years. "You hungry?" she said. Something loosened very slightly under my ribs. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I am." The Sunday after the party, my phone had been full. I want to say that, because for a while I thought I'd be the villain of that story, and I had made my peace with being the villain of it. Grant's cousin, who'd stood beside him at our wedding. "You okay? What happened?" A woman from the firm I'd met exactly twice. "I don't know what went on, but I want you to know I saw him say something to you, and then I saw your face. A man from his hockey league, 3 days later, awkward and short. For what it's worth, I've never liked how he talks about you when you're not around." And Priya, my closest friend since our first year at Carleton, who called at 7:04 a.m. and said only, "Where are you and do you want me in the car?" and who has never once in 20 years asked me to explain myself first. There's a thing that happens after 90 people watch a man dismiss his wife and then watch the music stop. The room decides. It decides fast and it decides quietly, and it does not tell him. Roland Thibault's office had dark wood and a photograph of him standing on a bridge deck in a hard hat, and a credenza with 2 curling trophies on it, and it was exactly the kind of room that's supposed to feel important and mostly just feels old. He was courteous, the handshake was brisk, the offer of coffee was real. He's a man who respects procedure, which is precisely why I called him. I sat down, opened my bag, and put the documentation on his desk. I didn't narrate. I didn't editorialize. I laid the pages in the order that made the pattern clearest: the incorporation, the invoice dates, the reimbursement claims, the account transfers, and I let him read. He read for several minutes. His face didn't do anything dramatic. But at some point his hands went still on the page, and he looked up at me with very careful eyes. "Mrs. Vance Baudry," I said. "It's Margot Baudry, always was." He nodded slowly, and I watched him understand two separate things at once. "Miss Baudry, I want to be sure I have the timeline right. I'll walk you through it." I did. He asked two clarifying questions. He wrote one note. He thanked me for coming in, and at the door he said, "I'm sorry," and I believed him. The partnership vote was pulled from the agenda that Thursday. Grant was suspended pending an internal review the following Monday. On the same morning, Yvette filed. The application landed at the courthouse on Elgin at 8:47, full financial disclosure attached. Every account, every transfer, the corporation, the expense records, all of it in the record before he had any room left to move what was still there. By noon, my phone showed 2 calls. Yvette's office first filed. He's been served. Then a woman from Thibault and Kerrigan, brief and professional. "Mr. Thibault wanted you to know the review has been formally opened." I stood in my kitchen. The afternoon light came through the window over the sink and lay flat across the counter, the way it does in November when there's snow on the ground reflecting it back up. I set the phone down. I breathed out once, slow the way you do when you've been holding something heavy for a long time, and you have finally set it down on solid ground. The sign went up on a Wednesday in March. Not big. White lettering, dark background, mounted flush over the glass door on a side street in the Glebe. Baudry Financial Forensics. The installer had done a good job. The letters were level. I stood on the sidewalk with my keys in my hand and looked at it while my breath went up in the cold, and then I unlocked the door and went to work. The office is small, but it is mine in a way no room has ever been. 2 desks, one for me, one for the analyst I hired in January, a round table by the window where I meet clients, binders along one wall, organized by matter and color-coded, built from a system I have been quietly perfecting for 11 years without a single person noticing. Grant noticed none of it. That used to sting. Now it just seems useful. Proof that I was always the one doing the work, which means I'm also the one who gets to keep it. The equalization was fair. More than fair, once Yvette put the depletion evidence in front of the mediator. The renovation withdrawals, the HELOC draws, the refunds, the corporation. The house sold in a strong spring market. My share, plus what the decree clawed back, covered the lease, a year of operating costs, and a cushion I never had while I was married. I don't think of it as a gift. I think of it as repayment. Winifred calls on Tuesday mornings now, without fail. We almost never talk about Grant. She calls to ask how the business is going, to pass along the name of a woman from her church whose husband has been cagey about a numbered company, to report on the state of her tomatoes, which are always a disappointment and always somehow her fault. Last month, she came in person and sat at the round table with a cup of tea and watched me take a client through 15 months of bank statements on speakerphone. When it was done, she nodded once and said quietly, "You were always the sharp one." I didn't answer, but I kept it. Grant is in a 1-bedroom in Barrhaven. The internal review took 5 weeks and concluded without ambiguity. The expense fraud was documented, systematic, and not small. He was terminated. There was a complaint filed with the association, and there was a repayment agreement, and the profession is not large, and Roland Thibault is well connected in it, and none of it was quiet. He found work eventually. Smaller shop. Reduced scope. A title that would have embarrassed him 2 years ago. I don't track this. It reaches me the way water finds low ground. Through Winifred. Through a contact mentioning something in passing. through the ordinary drift of information that keeps moving through a life even after the life stops being shared. I hadn't spoken to him since the decree. The text came in at 6:12 in the evening, on what would have been our 12th anniversary. I was still at my desk, lamp on, reading through a retainer file for a woman in Orléans who had found 3 chèques she couldn't account for. Detailed, careful. Interesting work that required exactly the kind of thinking I did for free for a decade. My phone lit up on the corner of the desk. Hope you're doing well. Thinking about you today. I read it once. Once was enough to understand exactly what it was. Not an apology, not an explanation. A man alone in a small apartment on a date that still means something to him, reaching for the familiar warmth of the person who used to make his life run, and wondering, quietly, whether she might still be available for it. I set the phone face down on the desk. I picked up the file and kept reading. The woman in Orléans had brought me statements going back 4 years, in a shoebox apologizing the whole time for the mess. I'd told her the mess didn't matter. I'd told her that what mattered was that she'd kept them. By 8, I had notes on all of it. I closed my laptop. I capped my pen and set it beside the pad. Before I turned off the lamp, I looked at the wall calendar out of habit, the last check of the day. Next Friday is circled in red. 1 year since I opened the door. I'm having people in. Nothing elaborate. Is coming. Winifred is coming. Yvette is coming. Priya is bringing her husband and complaining about it. My analyst has already ordered the cake, but I did the seating chart myself because I wanted to, and because at a table of 10, the difference between 8 inches and 14 is whether anyone talks. I turned off the lamp. I turned off the overhead. I locked the door behind me on my way out, and the sign over the entrance caught the streetlight while I walked to my car in the last of the cold.